What drove prison guards to throw a man with a mental disorder into a freezing cell? How dangerous is prison napalm? Why did a mass escape turn into a deadly trap beneath the prison? And these are only 3 of 5 stories about the most painful deaths behind bars. But, as always, viewer discretion is advised. In early September 2021, inside the Tafo Pankrono holding cell in Kumasi, one man ruled the room. His name was Awudu Abdullahi, heavy built, covered in old fight scars, and known for having balls of steel. No one in that cell dared challenge him. But that morning, a newcomer appeared among them. It was Jafaro Boak, thin and worn out, with the confused look of someone who still hadn't grasped where he had ended up. It was his first day behind bars, and he knew nothing about the one rule that mattered most. Every patch of space belonged to someone. So when he lay down on Abdullahi's bed just to get a few minutes of sleep, the others were already waiting for the show. Abdullahi walked up to the bed and told him to get up in a calm, firm voice. But the newcomer, exhausted from a night of arrest and questioning, didn't move. Boak woke up in the air. Abdullahi's hands ripped him off the bed and slammed him into the floor. Abdullahi hovered over him while his fists landed on ribs, face, chest. The newcomer tried to fight back, but the brute pushed forward like a tank. His vision blurred and panic rose. And then, instinct took over. Boak twisted sharply, grabbed Abdullahi by the thigh and sank his teeth into his groin. The big man screamed. Pain shot through his body so violently that his legs buckled. Boak clamped his jaw even harder like a pit bull. Blood burst across his face, and the men watching, who had never seen anything like it, stepped back in shock. Awudu collapsed onto the concrete, clutching himself. Convulsions came in waves. He groaned, losing strength with every breath. Boak finally let go and scrambled back. He was breathing in short, broken gasps, blood running down his chin, his hands trembling from the adrenaline. The cell went silent. On the floor lay what was left of Abdullahi's balls of steel, his severed testicles. The crash of metal doors snapped everyone out of it. Guards stormed in and froze for a moment, trying to make sense of the scene. 2 of them ran to Abdullahi. His face was gray, his eyes unfocused, his body shaking. He didn't react to pressure on the wound, only twitched in spasms. The others grabbed Boak and dragged him to isolation. A few minutes later, the guards brought Abdullahi to the medics and rushed him to the hospital, where he remained in critical condition. To this day, it is still unknown whether he survived. Boak received several more years for causing grievous bodily harm, and no matter how long he spends behind bars, it is unlikely anyone will try to push him off a bed again. This fight could have ended in seconds if guards had stepped in sooner, but in the next story, the people who were supposed to protect became the ones who tortured. At 35, Anthony Tony Mitchell from Alabama had been struggling for years with a severe mental illness that caused confusion, fear, and delusional episodes. In the weeks before his arrest, his condition worsened sharply. Living alone, he stopped leaving the house, barely ate, and was terrified of people he believed were following him. On the morning of January 12, 2023, his relatives arrived and saw Tony barefoot in the living room, pale, shaking, and gripping a shotgun like a man bracing for something only he could see. They called the sheriff's office hoping he would be taken to a hospital. But when deputies arrived, Tony began shouting and firing into the air instead of receiving medical care. He was restrained and taken to the Walker County Jail because armed individuals were isolated first under procedure, even if they were mentally ill. Inside the jail, they brought him to a cell known as BK5. It was a room where new arrivals waited for their paperwork. Its cold air conditioning system was intentionally kept at near freezing levels to cool down inmates who were agitated or difficult to control. That's why the staff called it the freezer. The temperature inside that concrete box dropped to about 5 degrees Celsius, almost as cold as the winter air outside in Alabama. Most detainees spent only a few hours in BK5, but Tony arrived in severe mental crisis, and no one even tried to help him. Instead of treatment, guards kept placing him in that freezing room, taking him out and bringing him back again since, in their eyes, he wasn't behaving. Sometimes they left him in there naked for an entire day. The cold and stress only worsened his condition. For the staff, BK5 became the easiest way to get him out of sight. Later, during the federal investigation, one officer admitted, "We let him freeze because no one wanted to deal with him." On January 24th, after 5 straight days of being kept in the holding cell, Tony could no longer stand. He crawled across the concrete, trying to find even a trace of warmth. The guards decided he had become too troublesome. Their reports later used the phrase to prevent self-harm. In reality, it was punishment. They dragged him out of BK5 and moved him into an industrial walk-in freezer used to store meat and vegetables. Inside, the air stayed between 1 and 3 degrees Celsius. They strapped him into a metal restraint chair. Normal inmates stayed in for a few hours, but Tony remained there for a full day. The metal under his skin burned with cold, and each breath felt like a gulp of ice. His arms and legs turned pale. His body shook in convulsions, yet no one loosened the straps. On the morning of January 26, 2023, guards found him lying motionless on the floor of BK5, his lips blue. They dragged him to a patrol car and placed him in the back seat. At Walker Baptist Medical Center, doctors measured his temperature. Instead of the normal 36.6 degrees, it had fallen to a deadly 22.2. He took only a few breaths a minute, and his heart beat less than 30 times in that same time. Bruises from the straps marked his body, and frostbite was visible on his skin. Doctors gave him warmed fluids and placed him on a ventilator, but 3 hours later his heart stopped. The report stated, death by hypothermia caused by conditions of confinement. The sheriff's office first claimed that the inmate had been conscious, but jail video showed him lying motionless while staff walked past him. After that, the case went to the FBI. 10 employees, including senior staff and medical personnel, were fired and charged with abuse. The Mitchell family filed a lawsuit and called his death a freezer execution. They later reached a confidential settlement in federal court. The amount was never disclosed, but the case forced the state to reconsider how inmates with mental illnesses are held. Tony's cousin said, "We asked for help, and they killed him with cold." Tony Mitchell became a victim of the freezing air that drained the life out of him, and another inmate could only dream of even a moment of cool airflow. The summer of 2011 in Texas became one of the hottest in decades. The air over Dallas shimmered with heat, and the asphalt softened under the sun. It was then that 58-year-old taxi driver from Waco, Larry Gene McCollum, made a desperate choice. He walked into a bank with a forged check for $350, hoping to get the money and pay his rent before he was evicted. But the teller noticed the signature didn't match the one in the bank's system and pressed the alarm button. Police arrived within minutes. The court took into account his clean record and cooperation, so Larry received only 11 months in jail. Not so bad, right? Or at least that's what Larry thought. On July 15th, he arrived at Hutchins State Jail near Dallas. Guards greeted new inmates with the words, "Welcome to hell." And it wasn't an exaggeration. The unair-conditioned cells heated to 45 degrees Celsius, the metal bunks burned the skin, and old fans pushed hot air in circles. For Larry, who had hypertension and kidney disease, the heat became a brutal test. To buy water or a fan, he needed an ID card, and newcomers waited weeks for it. So he drank from a metal sink where hot technical water burned his lips. He found a plastic lid on the floor and used it as a cup, and to cool himself, he placed wet clothes on his chest. Night brought no relief. The concrete stored the day's heat and never cooled. Larry couldn't sleep, his body burning and his heart racing. Cellmates later said he kept asking for water, but the guards only laughed. Within days, red patches covered his skin. He lost balance, and his eyes turned cloudy. On July 22nd, his 7th day in the jail, he didn't get up for the count. Guards walked to the cell and found him convulsing on the bunk. Medics measured his body temperature at more than 42 degrees Celsius, a full heat stroke with critical brain damage. They took him to Parkland Memorial Hospital in a coma, and even then, absurdly, they cuffed him to the bed. After 6 days, on July 28th, Larry's heart stopped. He never again regained consciousness. The investigation showed Larry's death wasn't an accident. That year, more than 10 inmates died from heat in Texas prisons, and each time the administration listed the cause as natural. The McCollum family filed a lawsuit against the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. The court ruled that officials had consciously disregarded the lives of inmates and ordered them to pay the family $905,000 in compensation. Yet, no one lost their job. The case finally pushed the state to start installing air conditioning in its prisons. Larry's daughter, Stephanie Kingery, said he was supposed to serve 11 months, but he ended up with a death sentence. This was just a taxi driver who made one mistake, but even the cold-blooded killer from the next story didn't deserve what happened to him. Though, you could decide for yourself when I present the facts. There are many ways to cause unbearable pain inside a prison, but one of the worst looks almost like a kitchen recipe, a mix of boiling water and sugar that turns into a sticky mess. It clings to the skin, holds heat far longer than water, and burns deeper each second. In prison slang, this mixture is called napalm. No one knows whether our young inmate, let's call him John, knew that recipe. But in early September 2013, he already had more than enough trouble. He was only 24, yet he had a long trail of thefts, robberies, assaults, and had been in and out of prison more than once. But that year, John made the biggest mistake of his life. At the end of July, during an argument on the N81 near Dublin, he pulled out a sawed-off shotgun and fired at another car. The bullet shattered the side window and hit the passenger seat where a 16-year-old girl was sitting. She died instantly. For this recklessness, impulsive violence, the court sentenced him to 20 years in Mountjoy Prison in Dublin. But for many, that sentence wasn't enough. Someone soon offered $13,000 for his killing, and inside the prison, a real hunt began. For weeks, inmates came after him, and each time he barely survived. Eventually, John was moved to protection block where he finally exhaled, but not for long. Late one evening, as the block settled for the night, 3 cellmates rested in the half-dark. When John climbed down from his bunk, the other 2 rushed him. One knocked him to the floor, and the other pinned him down. As he struggled, one of the attackers grabbed a kettle where water mixed with sugar had been boiling minutes earlier, supposedly for tea. He tilted it, and the napalm poured onto John's face, over his eyes, nose, and cheeks. John screamed, but the next wave hit his mouth and throat. The boiling mixture burned the lining instantly and scorched his skin, leaving it blistered and white. The smell of burned flesh filled the room, and the scream from the cell turned into a raw gasp. The guards ran toward the screams, but the sight in the cell made their stomachs turn. The man on the floor no longer looked human. The skin on his face peeled away in strips, his ears and cheeks sagged from the burns, and his eyes were half shut under a milky haze. He gasped for breath through swollen lips. They carried him into the corridor, wrapped him in a sheet, and called the medics. At the Mater Hospital burn unit, doctors confirmed deep 2nd and 3rd degree burns to his face, chest, and mouth. They said there was no way to restore his face. One guard later said John looked like a living zombie. He spent more than a week in the hospital. When John returned, everyone looked away. The staff put him in a protective cell 23 hours a day, and a few months later they transferred him to another prison, far from those still hoping to claim the reward on his head. Presumably, John lived on, forever mutilated for his violent actions. So what do you think? Did he really deserve such brutal, non-judicial revenge? Let me know in the comments. Our last story could have been a Shawshank Redemption in real life, but instead turned into horror. It was Thanksgiving, November 26, 1994, and coincidentally, the legendary Prison Escape movie released in theaters just a month prior. At the Darrington unit in Texas, the day felt quiet, almost calm. The guard staff was reduced because many had gone home for the holiday, but not everyone inside was enjoying the break. Among the hundreds of inmates were a few who were trusted a little more. They were assigned to cleaning and repair work in the service areas. They saw the narrow concrete tunnels under the building, lined with pipes, wires, and old ventilation shafts. Down there, everything was dust, noise, and darkness. But one thing stood out. There was no cameras. Looking at the old electrical panels, one of them noted that if the lights go out, controls go with them. That night, the 8 of them were on a late shift, while the rest of the block was asleep. They stayed in the service corridor. Someone removed the cover of an old electrical panel, reached into the bundle of wires and forced them together. A sharp crack followed in the next second, and the entire building went dark. Backup power triggered the emergency alarm, but the guards had no idea what had caused it. Meanwhile, below them, the inmates opened the damaged service latches they had prepared earlier and began to descend into the technical tunnel. The 8 men moved forward in the dim light, convinced that they were walking toward freedom. Little did they know that the tunnels beneath the unit were not a path out. One of them, feeling the walls for direction, touched an exposed wire. A sharp flash lit the space and he collapsed instantly. Another tried to help, but the current passed through him too, and both lay still on the floor. The others kept pushing ahead, stumbling over pipes. Soon one fell straight through an open shaft, leaving behind only the sound of metal echoing below. 2 more became stuck in a ventilation duct where the space was so tight the air barely moved. They began to suffocate, calling for help, but the tunnel was too narrow for anyone to reach them. When the power finally came back on, the guards understood what had happened. In the concrete shafts below lay bodies, burned, broken, wedged between pipes. Those who survived sat on the floor, pale and shocked, their arms wrapped around their knees as if still unsure it was over. No Shawshank redemption for them. The official report listed 5 dead, though journalists mentioned as many as 8. To quote one guard, "I have never heard so much screaming in the dark." Because of that night, the Darrington unit earned its reputation as one of the toughest prisons in Texas. But as we can see, any prison can turn into its own Squid Game, where you never know which step will lead to a painful end. So now, which of these stories struck you the most? Tell us in the comments and share whether you think there should be better control over what happens inside prisons. And do inmates deserve those unofficial punishments in addition to legal ones? As always, thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next story.